The concept of challenge grants became something that we noticed really moved the needle for donors. It's really about motivating a donor to give. There's only so many donation gifts that one individual can make. If you're going to raise more money, you have to have more people. It's also about finding larger donors who are able to step up with larger gifts, moving away from internal messengers and more towards external messengers. I mean, that's the ultimate type of social proof.
You're listening to The Nonprofit Boost, where Double the Donation and industry leaders share practical tips to help you grow revenue and boost corporate fundraising at your nonprofit.
Hello, everyone. You're listening to The Nonprofit Boost by Double the Donation. Welcome to a new episode, Why Donors Respond, Challenge Grants, and the Psychology of Giving. You're here with me, Jaland Lim, and today we're talking about challenge grants, campaign momentum, and the psychology behind donor action. Why certain fundraising messages move people to give, how nonprofits can build urgency responsibly, and what it really takes to create momentum that lasts. You're going to want to tune into this because we have no other than Michael Stein from Laguna Creek Consulting. Hey, Michael, how's it going?
Hey, Jaland. I'm doing great. It's nice to be here.
Hey, Michael. So I think the audience would like to know more about you first and Laguna Creek. So could you please give us an overview of what do you guys do?
Well, I'm basically a small fundraising shop, so a consultant, and I work with small and mid-sized nonprofit organizations all over the United States. I usually focus mostly on annual fund campaigns, but also deal with all kinds of sort of multi-channel aspects of fundraising, so how to coordinate campaigns across all the different channels that are at the disposal of modern nonprofits. During the early part of my career, I worked with larger organizations. Now, a little bit later on, I've enjoyed working more with small and mid-sized folks who really need the most help and often don't have a professional fundraising and development team. So I come in as a consultant to help them succeed with their campaigns and help them with development growth.
That's 30 years of experience that you have in the bag working with nonprofits, with technology adoption, and just generally fundraising growth. And so I'm sure you have a lot to share with us. So let me kick it off. One thing that we hear a lot is that a lot of organizations encounter the terms like challenge grant, urgency, and campaign momentum. Big words, but they may not always understand what actually is happening beneath the surface when donors respond. So to kick us off, I'd love to ground the conversation in the bigger picture. So when you think about challenge grants and donor response, what do you believe is really happening psychologically that makes these campaigns so effective when they work well?
Fundraising at its heart is kind of the art and science of persuasion, sort of encouraging people to, open their hearts, open their wallets to a cause, either a cause they're very familiar with or a cause that they're just learning about. And so, over the years, I think fundraisers have learned to try sort of different techniques, different methods, both in messaging and in just tradecraft to try to figure out how to move people. And I think somewhere early on in the fundraising sort of profession, the concept of challenge grants became something that we noticed really moved the needle for donors. So, and just definitionally, what we think of as a challenge grant is sort of like language that says, if you give, $20, one of our partners or one of our donors will double it or triple it, and we'll be able to raise more money, overall. So that's the basic concept of a challenge grant. There are, of course, a number of variants on that. Sometimes you have to wait until we get, if we get to $20,000, then we get another 20. There's like double grants and quadruple grants. I mean, I've seen all kinds of things all over the place. But at the end of the day, it's really about motivating a donor to give. Maybe it's the motivating a donor to give for the first time. Could be motivating a donor to give another time after they've already been a donor. Could be motivating a donor to give a larger gift. Sometimes it's about converting them from a one-time donor to a monthly donor. So there's all kinds of variations in how challenge grants and this kind of stuff plays into the psychology. And it is a psychological method of sort of, I was going to use the word manipulate, but I think it's a little bit drastic. It's more coaxing and encouraging the donor to see, the value in the gift. And I think this is where, this question about authenticity and trust really comes in. I mean, it's just so important that, when you use language and messaging, that you think a little bit about, how you want to frame the challenge. Who's giving, who's providing the challenge? Is it someone on your board? Is it a business partner? Is it a foundation, et cetera? And so I'm always encouraging my clients to try to find that authentic sort of messaging that's really gonna work, and being clear to the donor, how long a match will last for, or the challenge grant will last for. Maybe it runs out at a certain amount of time. You got to do it by the end of the month. Or maybe the end of the week, could be the end of the day. And I think these, challenge grants also have been especially effective, during the year-end period, which is a very kind of artificial time to fundraise. But of course, that December 31 kind of date, really plays a role. But frankly, I've seen those kinds of challenge grants used in all kinds of settings, all kinds of deadlines. And we know from studies that they work. We studied, and I've actually done a few of those myself in my career. You'll take, cohort 1, cohort 2. Cohort 1 has no grant, challenge grant. Cohort 2 has it, and usually almost always, the challenge grant is going to result in raising more money. The question, of course, is like, who is it raising the money from? Is it converting donors from one type of donor to another type of donor? So there are lots of sort of, more detailed elements of that. But fundamentally and psychologically, to your question, challenge grants, do move the needle on giving. And that's fundamentally why they're so popular today.
I really love what you said about coaxing and encouraging these donors, because I think the message that we really want to get across to these donors is that these challenge grants, these matches, are more than just a discount language or gimmicks, so to speak. Because at the end of the day, what these donors really want to see or to feel is that motivation, that trust, and that clarity that they can get. Where does the money that I give go? Where does my gift go? What more can it do? And speaking to those, you did mention that there are a lot of studies, and we actually conducted our own just last year. And we found out that as high as 84% of donors say that a match makes them more likely to give. So that is really a way to minimize leaving that money on the table, because at the end of the day, of course, who wouldn't want more money to go to their cause? Who wouldn't want to raise their impact and help more people?
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, Joanne, that you've done some of your own studies at Double the Donation. That's helpful to know. I think the challenge is also, as I alluded to before, like, from whom are, who's opening their wallet, to make the gift. I mean, sometimes I like to use challenge grants and matches, donor matches, also to motivate certain types of donors. And I think that's a real sort of tactical question in fundraising. Are you trying to get a first gift from somebody? Are you trying to get a larger gift from somebody? Are you trying to get a monthly gift from somebody? So challenge grants can actually be deployed in those very kind of tactical ways, for certain audience groups. So that's the way I think about it. And then, and also just from the psychology, and the authenticity question and the trust, it's also super important to think about sort of the language and the messaging around presenting a challenge grant or a match to an audience. I mean, I'm always talking to my clients about, just how to make it authentic, which, challenge grants and matches have been around for a decade or more. Part of the challenge of the challenge grant is that everybody is doing it. And so, when you get your year-end appeals in your inbox or in the mail or on social media, it feels like every single one of them has a match. And you're kind of like, okay, I can't even tell the difference or what the value of one match versus another match is. And I think that kind of match saturation is a little bit of a new problem that has crept in to the fundraising profession, which is why I am always pushing my clients and others to think about, okay, how are you going to make your match stand out? Because they're used so ubiquitously by nonprofits. And so, and that's where I really push people on, finding their creative edge with a match. So not just someone anonymous on our board has given us this match. Like, try to find, if you're an organization that's working on, I don't know, hunger relief in the community, maybe the match is offered by a supermarket or a food provider or just someone, so that you can really create something authentic around how the match how meaningful it can be. You can just apply that to really any setting. So going beyond the anonymous match and into something that's a little bit more visible, so that it has a little bit more authenticity, can make a really big difference. Also, smaller organizations tend to know a lot of their donors. And so they can smell when a match is not real, because they kind of know everything that's going on with organizations. So I think in this day and age, there is, I think, more pressure on nonprofits to create matches that are authentic, trustworthy, and that kind of stuff. And then the other theme I'll just bring into this mix around the creativity is also, really just finding your creative edge around bringing in, first-person testimonials around, how the match will help us, or how the appeal will help us. Bringing in video, making sure that you're, using every, medium at your disposal, whether it's social media, email, web, print, to try to highlight, just how the match will make an impact. I think. Really, really bringing in those sort of first-person stories are so important, and it also, lets the appeal stand out from others. So it's not just the executive director or the development director making the pitch for support or the pitch for the challenge match, but it's like someone in the community who's been helped by the organization, or it's a partner who's glad to be pitching in to do that. So even those elements, the messaging elements, make a difference and help build the trust and the authenticity that makes challenge grants and matches as effective as they are.
Nonprofits are always being asked to do more with limited time and resources. Double the Donations virtual summits offer practical insights, expert advice, and actionable ideas to help you grow your impact. Check out the summit calendar and register at doubletheDonation.com/virtual-summits. We'll see you there. I really love how you brought up one of the challenges being oversaturation, because it is true that there is a fine line between motivating and overwhelming people. And I think one of the other effects of having these challenge matches or challenge grants is the urgency. Some donors may feel motivated, but some may feel a bit pressured. So the challenge here is finding that right balance between encouraging them to give without being overly pushy, or rather manipulative, that you end up exhausting them, these donors, because at the end of the day, they are giving out of the goodness of their hearts. It is their choice to give, and it's important to make them feel like they want to give rather than they need to give. And one of the things that we noticed also works in this kind of messaging is to be transparent, as you've said, by using real-time messaging examples. Something like, we are halfway to unlocking the full challenge using these progress bars, these visual representations of how your challenge match is going, how your funds are growing. And another thing is that it's important to make these donors feel like they're a part of this giving community. Make them feel like they're a part of something bigger. Something like telling them your gift joins others already helping us reach this goal. So it's not pressuring, it's not pushy, but rather it just makes them realize how big the impact that they're making is by their donation, no matter how small or how large it may be. At the end of the day, it's getting doubled. It's joining others in giving. And really, it's just a beautiful way to show people that what you give goes a long way. And we've talked about messaging in terms of the do's, but I'd like to ask just a quick follow-up. What are some don'ts that you may have heard, or what kind of language to avoid when trying to create this momentum?
The most important thing to avoid is just kind of the things you alluded to before, which is a sort of repetitive messaging over and over again that doesn't have any variability to it. And also, basically you're relying too much on internal messengers to carry the fundraising, the fundraising appeal. So I think, those formulas are sort of easy to lean back on because, you've got a whole, you get your executive director, you can just get them to repeat over and over again what the need is. And, also there's this sort of impulse to just like, let's just add another email or let's just double down and just keep asking over and over again. Like, the concept of if you send an email and someone doesn't open it, well, let's just send another one because they didn't open it, as if that's going to kind of solve the problem. I think those are sort of easy things to fall back on. But I think as digital fundraising and multi-channel fundraising has gotten more sophisticated, I mean, everyone's doing those things on some level. So really what you shouldn't be doing is falling back on them, but really finding, other creative ways to get your message across. And I think, moving away from internal messengers and more towards external messengers. I mean, that's the ultimate type of social proof, which is, getting someone in the community who's been impacted by the organization's work to speak about their experience. I mean, that's really the ultimate fundraising appeal. And I'm, always pushing people, into that arena. So there really should be, and that does take planning and organizing as you're putting together a fundraising campaign. So sure, you're going to spend a lot of time, writing emails and thinking about, the dates in which you want to send things out and when we're going to put things on social media and if we're going to run some ads, et cetera, et cetera. But also just really important to take a step back and say, who do we want to be the spokespersons for this campaign? Who do we want the social proof to come from? And it can come from donors, or it can come from people in the community who've been helped. It can come from partners in the community that you work with. But all of those tend to be, more powerful spokespeople and messengers, for the campaign. So if I had to say, what not to do and what to do, I mean, I think leaning more towards those external messengers. I think that's where that authenticity and where that trust really gets built. I mean, true persuasion fundraising is really finding good spokespeople to talk about the impact, and that has to come from outside the organization as opposed to from inside the organization.
Thanks for sharing those, Michael. I think those are really actionable points, aside from them being effective, but they're also really simple that any organization could do, may they be a smaller one or a larger one. And it's something that can work across the board. And with our discussion, I think we've pretty much established how helpful these matches, these grants can be. But for now, let's talk about the other side of the coin. Because actually, not every fundraising campaign needs a challenge attached to it. And sometimes organizations may be tempted to use one simply because it sounds exciting. And as we have discussed, it is effective. But sometimes the best strategy is usually about the fit, timing, and audience readiness. So now my question for you would be, when does a challenge style fundraising approach make the most sense within a broader development strategy? Well, especially for annual giving, major gifts, or campaign based fundraising. And when might it be the wrong tool?
Vary a lot depending on the organization itself. And I'm often try to pull away from just the trade craft of fundraising and getting people to talk more about, like I'll often say, show me your calendar for the whole year. I want to understand what you do year round. When are the different points in your calendar when you're doing specific projects in the community? When are you releasing any kind of research? When is your board or any of your community relationships, are they really being built up? And to my mind, this question about the right timing for fundraising, has to be built on top of the real world work of the organization. Now, of course, we do have, the Giving Tuesday thing in November, December. We do have the year end, which is this kind of traditional giving time, which of course, pretty much every organization, has to adhere to. We've had that in the United States now for, probably for 20 or 30 years. But then there's, the other 10 months of the year, and really thinking about what makes sense for every organization, I think is unique to every other organization. I love to give the example when I used to work with Habitat for Humanity International. They're known for helping to build people's homes and rebuild homes. They do most of their work with their volunteers in the summer. So their perfect time for fundraising is the spring. And the message is, when you give, you help us build during the summer. Even just a simple framing like that is just the magic that an organization, that Habitat, of course, it took them, years to figure that out. But once they had figured it out, it became part of the DNA of how they approach fundraising. And they basically have trained their donors, give in the spring so that we can build more in the summer. So I always encourage, every organization to find that kind of magic, that kind of magic moment for them. And I do believe every organization has those kind of like magic moments in the year, and again, it's going to depend on whether you're working on education or, animal rights or human rights or LGBT. There's always something. That's why, of course, all of the celebratory months are really useful for organizations, so that, if you're working on mental health issues, March is a great time. Or if we're working on LGBTQ, the Pride months are a great time. So those kinds of things also help us find ideal times of the year when our messaging is, particularly more likely to be impactful, and when we can connect, the impact that the organization does with, how your gift is gonna fit into that. But I think every organization has to do that search over the years. I mean, it's easy to drop into the Giving Tuesday and the year end, but how do you work with the other 10 months of the year is really, for every organization to explore. I've had organizations try to do something in certain months and just, this isn't working. It's like, no, it doesn't look like it is. Let's try to move it back over here. And it does take experimentation from the development team to figure out how, what are going to be the best times to roll out those kinds of campaigns.
It's really important for a nonprofit to understand how their donors work and what their calendar is in order for these things to align. And as you said, find that magic moment. And as you've said, and in that example you gave for Habitat for Humanity, it's something that they built up through the years. But I think my question would be, let's say this nonprofit is a new one, or rather they don't have that time, really, that metric of time. They don't have that much data to go off of, nor do they have the capacity to run a quote unquote study for that lengthened period of time. So what would be an easy guideline, or rather what has to be true internally before a nonprofit is actually ready to run this well? What can they look into right now and that would help them identify rather whether or not to use a challenge grant or not?
One approach that development shops can use as they're kind of getting started with this is to do, focus groups or surveys or just, meet and greets with donors. I mean, I think small nonprofits that are getting off the ground, will often, lean into those strategies because they have like 1 degree of separation between themselves and their donors. Some of their initial donors are going to be people that they know well in the community. And so, really having those conversations with people to explore, what's the most meaningful time for their support to really matter is something that you have to do through a discovery process. So whether it's, a focus group or getting together a couple nights a month, over drinks at a restaurant, or getting together at conferences or events. I mean, it's something that every organization has to discover for themselves. But that discovery is going to happen in partnership with their supporters, not separate from them. I mean, we sometimes think that that donors and supporters are like this, it's sort of amorphous group that's out there, that just interacts with you while they're writing a check or sending money. But in reality, a lot of donors and supporters, are very close to the organizations they support. And also the smaller the organization, the closer they are. So I like to say, when you're very small, you literally know all of your donors by name. You can look down, the 200 gifts you got last year, and you literally know every single person by name, and you've probably met all of them. So a lot of, I think development programs, do have to be built around that familiarity. You're not creating a development program as something, that's either very tactical or so tradecraft driven that it isn't based in the real world. So really just focusing on real world relationships with donors, learning from them, hearing from them, and getting their input on that stuff is really a critical kind of early stage, I would say, in most development programs. Of course, as a development program or development team evolves in size and sophistication, they have the flexibility or the freedom to build out from there. And of course, they lose that closeness they have with a lot of their donors. But then again, they're raising more money, they're reaching more people, which for most organizations is one of the goals. But for everyone starts somewhere. I mean, that's why for me, I've always enjoyed working with small to mid-size nonprofits. I think they're the ones, who need a lot of help, but also it's very it's very touching to see how their relationships in the community work and how strong they are. And I think that's such an important part of nonprofit evolution and growth, and impact. So those relationships are really critical.
Something that nonprofits have to keep in mind is to not leave their donors behind. We do know that they have their projects, they have their goals. Of course, they have a whole community that they want to help out. But it's so important to understand and cultivate the relationships that they have with their donors, because after all, they are the pillar of the nonprofit. And without them, basically, these endeavors would not be possible. And a lot of nonprofits would struggle between juggling these two things, which are reaching their goals, trying to raise more, but at the same time protecting the donor relationships that they have long term. Because they want energy and momentum, but they also don't want every campaign to feel high pressure or leave supporters tuning out. So another question I would have is, what advice would you give to nonprofits and schools that want to create this real campaign momentum and stronger donor action without contributing to fatigue for either their audience or even their internal team, their staff and whatnot, their leadership? Because we know that a lot of nonprofits are also stretched out, and a lot of these staff are fulfilling multiple roles all at once. So how do we avoid that fatigue externally and also internally?
One element of it is to build a program, a fundraising program that's just always oriented towards growth, and that's always oriented towards, donor cultivation and donor engagement, and to keep those as kind of the the pillars of the campaign. A lot of donors for nonprofits often start out as volunteers or as community advocates, and then they will become donors once they understand, how much impact they're able to make. And so those kinds of unique relationships between organizations and their volunteer advocate donors is just such an important one. It's when we talk about community engagement, that's really what we're talking about. It's the closeness of those relationships. And so, one way to avoid staff burnout is really to have those relationships be strong. When staff is cultivating and working with the community, they're seeing the results of their work take fruit. They're watching it evolve. And also, you get there's a sense of excitement when you see your impact growing and spreading. So most successful development and fundraising programs must grow so that they can keep surviving. Also, to your point before, there's only so many donation gifts that one individual can make. So if you're gonna raise more money, you have to have more people. At its core, fundraising is a numbers game. Sometimes that's a little bit of a dirty word or dirty concept in fundraising, but we do have to grow the list. We have to grow the number of donors so that we can make a larger impact. So it is about numbers. And it's also about finding larger donors who are able to step up with larger gifts, people who want to be able to join the board. So even just understanding structurally how to build a successful fundraising program, requires an understanding of how many donors do we need? How many new ones do we need this year? Who do we need to step up into a bigger donor category? So all of that nitty gritty of building a development program, plays a role in kind of the success. And it plays in also just to the concept of momentum, right? A growing donor base sort of adds momentum and energy. If you're a nonprofit and you're working on some kind of important community engagement project, you're working on something that's advocacy related, which relies on numbers of people. All those pieces can be critical to create momentum, and that momentum adds to growth. That growth leads to more revenue raised, and all those things kind of work together to help organizations succeed.
I love that you brought up volunteers because, as we all know, or as you mentioned, rather, volunteers, they can be staff or they can be volunteers turned donors later on. And it makes me think that another way to avoid this fatigue, rather, would be to explore these employer-sponsored giving opportunities. Because one misconception that we have is that giving more means reaching deeper into one's pocket. But in reality, that's not the case if they do know the channels that they can leverage in order to give more without necessarily giving more money per se, because these volunteers can take advantage of their volunteer time off if their employer offers that, a volunteer grant. So their time can turn into treasure, or rather matching gifts that when they give a donation, their employer can match it or even double it. And in that way, you give more without giving more, if you get what I mean, but rather you just
Absolutely.
need to find the right way to help raise your impact.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, the double the donation example that you slipped in there is of course perfect. I think donors of all sizes need to be educated about the fact that their employers will often, match their gift. I mean, many donors are already aware of this because their employer is very open about promoting this. Other donors are not aware. That's why it's so helpful, for example, to have the double the donation lookup widget available on websites and donation pages. I mean, when I've deployed the tools for some of my past clients, it's just so important. And you sometimes hear people, gosh, I had no idea that my company X did this, and I'm so glad the tool was here. So it really is an important piece of the puzzle. I mean, the other way that people that donors can be tasked with helping to fundraise is through what we call peer-to-peer fundraising or friend raising. So an individual can say, I've pretty much tapped out all that I can give this year, and I gave whatever $500. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pledge to raise $500 from my friends, or $1,000 from my friends, and even that element of friend raising, let's just call it, is a really important part of fundraising, since it allows us to expand the base of donors. And that's where one donor or one volunteer plays such a critical role. They have a network of friends and family, coworkers, and people they hang out with on the basketball court that they can ask for support. And even if some of those gifts are small, $5, $10, they allow the organization to get a new small donor prospect into their midst. So there's just so many ways that volunteers and donors can make an impact, both from their own pocket, as you said before, but also through these other community outlets, whether it's fundraising or other means. I mean, it was basically platforms like Facebook that sort of invented the whole concept of fundraising. That's of course expanded far beyond Facebook or Meta to other platforms as well. So I'm always educating, especially smaller organizations, that this is a great way to build your donor list, and to get people, even if they're just giving $5 or $10, great way to get them in the door. They become prospects, for each year to make larger and larger gifts. But really relying on the volunteer donor and the volunteer outreach person to help do that is a critical piece of the puzzle.
I think that really just speaks to how momentum doesn't have to end at first donation, whether that be cultivating your relationship with a specific donor so they become a long-term donor or a repeat donor, or using this channel that they have, this community. Because the beauty of fundraising is that it doesn't rely on just one person. There are a lot of ways to really extend that impact. And it's just a matter of making people aware of them. Because at the end of the day, everyone is willing to give for a cause that they care about. And our job here is to just make it easier for them to be able to give, to be able to be more generous with what they want to give, and to really just help everyone be aware of these things and create this community of givers. So to close, I'd like to leave listeners with just one simple takeaway that they can put into practice right away. So, if a nonprofit or school wants to strengthen donor response in its next campaign, what's one small change to its messaging or structure that can make an immediate difference?
Come back to a theme that I talked about before, which is this idea of having a community voice be able to express the fundraising impact for the organization, which may require a little bit of pre-planning, but it could be everything from just a photo and a caption and a testimonial. It could be a small video. It could be who signs the email appeal, etc. But really just trying to, again, lean away from the executive director being the person making the ask and leaning into having a community member do it instead. It means the ultimate way to broaden the messenger for the campaign. And I think that donors, prospective donors and others just respond just really well to that kind of ask. And also because it breaks the mold also of what they see now. And because of this, as we said before, this oversaturation of fundraising, it's just so important for organizations to stand out from the crowd. And so by leaning into these alternative spokespeople, I think it really helps to make a campaign stand out from the crowd.
Michael, this has been so helpful, and I appreciate how practical this all was, not just for large and advancement teams, but also for nonprofits and schools of all sizes who are just trying to build campaigns that are strategic, credible, and motivating. But before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Now's a good time to be thinking about what you need to plan for the spring and summer before the year end. So I'm always saying to folks, now's a good time to refresh your website, improve the general vibe for a prospective donor. Go to that little donation page or ways to give, freshen that up as well. Go freshen up your welcome series. So I call that the spring cleaning effect. So the spring is the perfect time to do that. And it's just always important for organizations just always to be brushing up and improving all of their communications, because donors and prospective donors, they notice little things like that. And so any way you can make those improvements, whether it's on the web, ways to give pages, social media, anything in print, just so important to do that. And spring is a perfect time to do it.
And on that note, that's all for today's episode, Why Donors Respond, Challenge Grants, and the Psychology of Giving. That was Michael Stein from Laguna Creek Consulting, sharing with us some actionable tips and practical advice that any nonprofit can apply right now. This was Joanne Lim on the Nonprofit Boost podcast by Double the Donation, and we'll see you next time. Bye!
Here's your next steps. Visit doublethedonation.com to explore the tools and strategies that schools and nonprofits use to unlock more revenue through corporate fundraising. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe and share the video with your team and peers.